Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly fascinating, Morgan Alexander Davis's memoir, Sprained Feelings. But right off the bat, I want to clarify something. We aren't going to unpack this as your typical sad chronological autobiography. Instead, we are going to look at it as a meticulously structured recovery operating system. 6,000. Yeah, that is the exact number of pages in the raw, totally undoctored archive that was used as the foundational evidence for this entire account. We are talking a massive span here, from 1997 all the way to 2024. Journals, text logs, receipts, medical records, legal documents, the whole shebang. She didn't just sit down and invent a polished version of herself for this, she brought the literal receipts. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the archive, examine her public mask versus private chaos, and meet her internal board of directors. Then we'll explore the pendulum and the rain, learn the rules of the sandbox, and finally put it all together into her recovery operating system. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the 6,000-page archive. To really get Morgan, you kind of have to understand her immense natural capacity. Imagine being a state and national record-holding track star. She had 28 scholarship offers on the table, including one from Brown University. But instead of chasing athletic glory, she had to pivot. She had to redirect all of that intense, explosive energy into just surviving a diagnosis of bipolar 2. Her approach to this is just brutally honest. She says, "I don't delete the human parts to look pretty." Today, she introduces her present-day reality, sitting out on an Alabama patio, holding a Cayman Jack, and fully embracing her past wreckage as absolute proof of her survival. She's definitely not trying to sell us some pastel, perfectly curated recovery narrative. She's giving us the raw truth. That brings us to section 2, public mask versus private chaos. So let's jump back in time a bit to the year 2009. Morgan was basically auditioning for the totally exhausting role of the perfect girlfriend to a guy named Jeff. And wow, the contrast here was staggering. On the outside, public Morgan was broadcasting under her online handle, Scorpio Life. She's out there selling this breezy, cool girl merch, posting things like domestic bliss smells like weed and furniture polish. Sounds chill, right? But if we look into her private, password-protected diaries from those exact same days, we see private Morgan literally suffocating under constant surveillance. She's writing, "I feel like I am walking on eggshells." Now, you might be wondering, where does this intense need to perform come from? Well, the roots of this public performance trace back through a timeline of early traumas. In 2003, there was Johnny, her high school sweetheart. That created the initial wound of heartbreak. Then, in 2004, came Jeremy, an addict who really clarified her survival instincts. By the time she moved out to California in 2008 to be with Joff, she honestly wasn't even looking for passion anymore, she was just looking for safety. She had learned to hide her true self behind this carefully curated facade, entirely to avoid getting hurt again. To really grasp the absurdity of this era, you have to hear about an event she calls the How's It Hanging incident. Get this. She spent days agonizing, analyzing herself, and apologizing to Joff. Why? Simply because she casually sent him a message asking, "How's it hanging?" He somehow perceived it as a malicious attack. So she compromised her own sanity, basically gaslighting herself, just to keep that perfect relationship narrative alive. Moving on to section 3, the internal board of directors. So to manage all this external chaos and the sheer exhausting demand to always be performing, Morgan's mind operated like a totally dysfunctional office building and was run by a very specific committee. You've got Pam, the worrier. She's risk-averse, always checking the receipts. Then there's Roy, the absolute cynic. He's lurking in the break room, fully expecting betrayal at any moment. Up front, you have Morgan, the performer, who is just laughing at tragedy to keep the show going. And finally, alcohol, the hijacker. These 4 distinct voices were constantly battling it out for control, with a hijacker often just grabbing the microphone and gagging everybody else. This brings us to a really savage realization she had. My brain can sell me a lie in a voice that sounds like truth. That perfectly captures the absolute danger of that internal boardroom. You can't even trust your own thoughts. It's exactly why she eventually required an entirely new, evidence-based operating system. She couldn't rely on those internal voices anymore. She literally needed an external framework to survive her own mind. All right, section 4, the pendulum and the rain. Flash forward to March 2020. Right as the global pandemic was kicking off, Morgan found herself inside a sober living rehab facility called Beauty for Ashes. Stripped of everything, her audience, her car, her typical coping mechanisms, the old masks finally shattered. And from that, her proprietary survival frameworks were born.
Most people think of bipolar strictly as emotional mood swings. Happy one day, sad the next. But Morgan defines it quite literally as physics and gravity. She calls it the pendulum. It's an inevitable gravitational swing between the high voltage of mania and the crushing gravity of depression. But here's the absolute key. A pendulum must pass through the middle. And that middle, that is where facts live and promises actually hold.
Building on that, she developed another incredibly crucial concept that separates the feeling from the reaction. First, there is the rain. That's the sudden arrival of symptoms, the conditions, your internal weather. Then there is the storm, which is your behavior. The storm is what happens when you give the rain a verdict, or worse, when you let it drive the car. The realization here is life-changing. Rain is not the storm. She learned that she doesn't have to dissolve or apologize just because she's getting wet. The weather is completely impersonal. You can experience the symptoms of bipolar without letting them dictate destructive behaviors. Let's move to Section 5, Rules of the Sandbox. So, in her present-day reality, living in what she affectionately calls the Sibbert compound, she utilizes this ultimate hard-earned strategy for dealing with chaotic relationships. It's how she protects the balance she's finally found. She calls it the sandbox. What is it exactly? Well, it's the shallow end of relationships. It's a nervous system setting where you just let chaotic people be chaotic without trying to fix them. After years of practically drowning in the deep end, trying to save broken men and polish their rough edges, she had this massive revelation. She realized nobody actually hired her to be the CEO of other people's vibes. When chaotic energy, or, what she calls that guy, enters the room, she follows this exact sandbox protocol to gatekeep her mind. Step 1, identify the person killing the vibe. Step 2, adopt the kicker mindset. The quarterback is the one getting tackled in the mud, but the kicker stays clean on the sidelines. Step 3, retreat to the sandbox. And step 4, just score your points, bring the fun for yourself, and sit down. Basically, don't try to coach the team.
I don't chase peace, I trap it. Man, I love that. She completely stopped volunteering for free emotional labor. She finally recognized that access to her mind and her energy is a privilege, for sure, not a right. If someone brings a storm into her yard, they do not automatically get sandbox privileges.
Finally, Section 6, the Recovery Operating System. So if we pull all of these amazing concepts together, it reveals the true hidden framework behind her remarkable recovery and her daily maintenance. This specific sequence appears over and over again across that entire 6,000-page archive. It functions as the constitutional doctrine that quite literally keeps her alive. It starts with the witness, moves to gathering evidence, recognizes the pendulum swing, accepts the rain without creating a storm, returns to home or balance, and finally commits to maintenance. At the very heart of this entire operating system is what she calls the witness. The witness is basically an internal recording function. It simply observes and records data. It does not prosecute, it doesn't try to predict the future, and it certainly doesn't try to control external events. It's the part of her that just watches the chaos, documents it exactly like she did in those thousands of pages, and absolutely refuses to drown in it. And this brings us to her final evolution. I don't need a filter, I need a witness. She doesn't need those performative filters from her MySpace days anymore, and she definitely doesn't need the exhausting cool girl masks she used to wear just to please others. She relies entirely on the raw, unedited truth to navigate her life now. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly vital question to ponder. Why do we keep trying to fix the game we didn't design, instead of just stepping off the field and building our own sandbox? How much of your own peace are you sacrificing right now just to play a game you were never, ever meant to win? It's a hugely powerful takeaway about giving up control over what we can't change and fiercely guarding what is actually ours. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it gave you a powerful new framework for looking at your own operating system.